Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursalin sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi yassir wa la tu'assir, rabbi tammim bil khair. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Alhamdulillah, today we are able to continue our understanding of the prophetic history, not just to understand, but to extract key learning points from his passage, from his journey, so that we can become better people, we can become better Muslims in the world that we live in today. And today we are entering into the year of deputations, which is the 10th year of Hijrah. So this is a year whereby the Prophet ﷺ, he started to receive deputations or delegations of people from other parts of the Arabian Peninsula mainly. And it was also called the year of deputations because it was also the time in which the Prophet ﷺ started to send out companions to other parts of the Arabian Peninsula to teach the community about Islam. Now, why did this happen? Now, firstly, we need to understand that this comes after periods whereby the Prophet ﷺ was going through a lot of expeditions, missions, right, to quell the enemies in the forms of the mushrikins of Mecca, who were trying to cause harm onto the Muslims and to prevent the Muslims from spreading the word. So eventually, when all has come to a stop, especially during the Prophet ﷺ's entry into Mecca, in the peaceful conquest of Mecca. So this was a period of time whereby missions or expeditions, it stopped. So now the focus was more on diplomatic relationship. This was a period whereby peace is established and where people now wanted to know more about Islam. Now, but why were people coming into Madinah to know more about Islam? Now, two reasons. Firstly, because they started to see the success enjoyed by the Muslims. And these successes were mainly on the battlefield. Now, the Arabs were known to have been fighting wars. Even in Medina themselves, the people of Aus and Khazraj, they have been engaged in wars. And people of Mecca, they've been engaged. So war has been a very common thing and common culture in the Arabian Peninsula, within the Arabian community. But why was it something, what about the Muslims that attracted them? It was the manner in which the Muslims conducted themselves. Yes, they got involved in a battle, but it wasn't a battle to just plunder. It wasn't a battle that culminated in people being abused, in the abuse of prisoners, in the humiliation of those people who were conquered. So there was a particular decorum, there was a particular manner in which the Muslims conducted themselves that attracted the people. And this was especially shown in the liberation of Makkah al-Mukarramah. How the Prophet ﷺ entered with 10,000 Muslims against their arch rivals, the very people who have sent them out, the very people who have been abusive towards them, the very people who were responsible for numerous plans to actually annihilate the Muslims. When the Prophet ﷺ entered with 10,000 soldiers, spearheaded by Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, right, himself, when they entered into Makkah al-Mukarramah, there was no blood spill. In fact, it was peaceful. So people saw there was something about the Muslims. There was some form of control. There was some form of um, ability within themselves to restrain. So it was not the kind of wars that the Arabs knew. It was not the kind of confrontation. It was not the kind of relationships they know when you conduct yourself with your enemies. It was always me putting you down. It was always about me abusing you. It was always about me making sure that I win. And when I win, I make sure that for years to come, you remembered my victory over you in the manner in which I conduct it, in the sense that it's violent, is always very in your face, in the words of people today. By the time Prophet ﷺ, the gentle manner, and you know, you're talking about battles and talking about gentle, they don't seem to go together. But in times of when the Prophet ﷺ does it, right, and the Muslims does it, so the Arabian people start to sit up. There is something about this movement. There's something about Muhammad and his movement, and therefore they wanted to know more. And therefore they came to the point whereby they understood, therefore, that what drove the Muslims, what made them disciplined, what made them driven at the same time was this religion, Islam. Because putting everything in common, The people in Mecca and people of Madinah before Islam, they know that when they fought wars, the drive was desire. Just naked desires, just the desire to achieve, to grab things and to be in power. And despite them fighting the people opposite them, they know that both of them are fighting for the same thing, to fulfill their egos, to get into the throne, to get to be powerful, to be in control. But there was something about the people called the Muslims that were different from them, and they therefore attributed this to Islam. Which us to the next point, whereby therefore people were attracted to Islam and wanted to know about Islam because of the akhlak, of the exalted mannerisms of the Prophet ﷺ, followed by the companions. So you see, they were excelling, right? They were excelling, they were doing well, and at the same time, they have exalted mannerisms. You put these two together, it becomes manifested. All right. In what? In the words of scholars, lisanul hal afsahu min lisanil maqal. And this is the beautiful part, that when Islam first started, the Prophet went from door to door, went for every Muslims. All right. The response was it varied. There was resistance in general, and there were those people who were able, there were people who actually were able to comprehend the message, and then they became Muslims. But in the 10th year of Hijrah, you see that people now instead went to Madinah. The Madinah became a magnet for people, not to go there to just merely convert, but they went over because they wanted to know more. So this is our first lesson learned today, before we even go into the details. But the importance of us, therefore, in Islam, to achieve two things: to strive for excellence, to always be in a state whereby we want to do well, to excel in whatever we do, to put our best effort in, to put our best foot forward. Allah says in the Quran, وَمَن يُسْلِمْ وَجْهَهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى. Whomsoever surrenders himself to Allah. This is talking about our spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. And at the same time striving to do good for ourselves and the community and the people and the world that we live in. وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. Alright, فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى. That this person has held on to a rope, has held on to something most firm. Because this is what embodies Islam. That you have a spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, the spiritual relationship translates into the desire, into the zeal to do further good for ourselves and the community around us. And that's what the Muslims are all about. All right? That they are always striving to do well, that they put their best effort in, that they put everything, whatever that they are given, right? Whether they are good in wartime stratagem, or whether they are good with their wealth, whatever that I have, I've put it for the sake of Islam. When I say I put it for the sake of Islam, people will benefit from this. It's always a thought about benefiting people. That's the first thing. And then the second, all right, it's important for us to therefore know that striving for success alone, it must be based upon a more important foundation that a Muslim must have, which is exalted mannerisms. If we are just people who are successful, if we are just people who merely do well, then we are just a face in the crowd, in a community, in a world where everyone just wants to do well. Everyone wants to do well, everyone wants to be successful, everyone wants to be in an influential position. But what is most important here is that what actually is the roots? What are the roots? What are the foundations to this success? What makes us want to be successful? What makes us want to strive for excellence? Then it comes from exalted mannerisms. It comes with exalted mannerisms. The Muslims were successful in liberating Mecca. The Muslims were successful in making the people of Taif, all right, become Muslims. The Muslims were successful in subduing the threat posed by the Byzantine Empire. That's impressive. On its own, it's impressive. But what makes it more illuminating, what makes it greater, was the fact that the Muslims did it with a particular level of discipline, that there was akhlak, there was some tenderness to it. This is what is most important today. Because if we are successful, but at the same time we compromise our akhlak, then what is in return is arrogance. And in the Quran, we have numerous examples of people who are successful, who are wealthy, who do well. We have Fir'aun, We have people of Ad, right? People of Thamud. All these people were successful people. Qarun, economically successful. But why did the Quran take a very critical, right, stand towards them? Why were prophets sent onto such people? Was because they do not have the akhlak that is necessary to accompany, to um, to be the foundations of the success that is achieved. So that's the most important thing. So first lesson learned is that we need to strive for excellence. But secondly, the more important lesson that we should take from this is that our successes must be founded on good akhlak, exalted mannerisms. Now, this was most exemplified in this wonderful conversation, which is why you look at the Muslims, subsequently, it was just not Mecca, Madinah, or Ta'if. They were able to extend the influence of Islam into other countries, entering into Syria, entering into Jordan, Persia, or modern day Iran. Why was this so? Why was this so? And this was especially because these areas, Persia, they were ruled in modern day Iran. In the past, they were ruled by the Persian Empire, and Byzantium Empire was already entrenched in Syria, in Jordan, and henceforth. But why were these two great superpowers at the point of time, the Persians and the Byzantium Empire? Why were the Persian Empire? Why were they chased? Why were they defeated by the Muslims? What made the Muslims successful in these areas? It was a culmination of those two factors I mentioned just now. Because the Byzantium Empire and the Persian Empire, they had wealth, they have the best logistical support ever if you go into a battlefield with them. They are more technologically advanced, right? They have a vast soldier, everything else they have. But they were also known to be arrogant. They were also known to have a lifestyle that was hedonistic, that compromised all foundations that was necessary to build a society that is based on morality. So that was the reality. This was mentioned in Ibn Kathir in a very interesting conversation, all right, between Heraclius. Now, Heraclius was the leader of the Byzantium Empire. Now, on the verge of their eventual withdrawal from the Arabian Peninsula. So while he was leaving, he called upon his generals. He had an emergency meeting because he was bewildered. He was surprised to be defeated by the Muslims. And they were known to be, when they first saw the Muslims, all right, they were called the Arabs of the desert in a very demeaning way. So it's like, who are these people? All right, in some narrations, they say that the Byzantium Empire, when they first engaged with Khalid bin Walid soldiers, this happened after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. This happened in the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq. They actually had a snigger and a laugh among themselves because they saw that these Arabs, a ragtag group of people coming together, don't even have a proper attire. You look at the Byzantium Empire. They were formidable. They were elite forces. They look very intimidating. But the Arabs, to the point where the Byzantium said to them, "We're going to send you back to the desert. You backward people." So eventually, fast forward, now that the Muslims were on the verge of victory and sending and kicking the Byzantium Empire out of the Arabian Peninsula, all right, Heraclius started to call a meeting of his generals. All right, this is in Ibn Kathir Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, and he started to ask them, right? Ask them, tell me about these people whom we are fighting with, right? Tell me about these Muslims. Aren't they humans? Why can't we defeat them? Are they kind of superhumans, or aren't they humans? And the general says, yeah, they are human beings like us, right? And aren't we more than them? By sheer numbers, we are more than them. Says, yeah, we are way more than them, says the generals. And then why are they able to defeat us? Because we are logistically more superior, we have more numbers, and they are human beings. Because the understanding is very much based on the idea of physical, right? Well, the physic, right? And one of the generals replied, this were a group of people that they establish night prayers and that they fast in the day. Now, what's prayers and fasting got to do with their success? Right? Means that these people are very spiritually driven, that they're spiritually sound. And people, when they are spiritually sound, no matter how you try to break them physically, is the spirit that will hold them firm in the face of the tribulations that you will inflict upon them. This was shown by the Prophet ﷺ. This was shown by the companions. All right, no amount of physical torment or torture can actually harm, all right, can actually change much when the spirit is strong. So they do their night prayers and they fast in the day. And these are people who enjoin goodness and then they forbid evil. Amar ma'ruf nahi munkar. So they keep asking people to do good. And anything that is detrimental to society, anything that causes society to be dysfunctional because of a lack of morality, because of the collapse of a moral system, they are against it. And they keep to their promises. They fulfill their promises. Small promises, big promises, whatever promises they make, they try to achieve it and they try to keep to it. And lastly, they respect one another. Means there was no animosity between them. There was respect. How can they be disrespect when Prophet ﷺ says, "Laisa minna man lam yuwakir kabirana wa yarham saghirana." That it's not from amongst the ummah. It's not a Muslim thing for you to be disrespectful to the elderly and to have no love and compassion for the young. But this was the Muslims. What about us? We get drunk. This is what the general says. We get drunk, we drink and get drunk, we fornicate, we perform all that is forbidden. All right, we break our promises, we are abusive. All right, we enjoin evil. All right, we enjoin evil and then we forbid goodness. And we spread evil on this earth. And that's why. All right. So the Muslims are driven, and it's again back to the formula we said just now. It was just not about being successful on the battlefield, but of it. People saw that the Muslims as an individual themselves, that they were formidable. Why were they formidable? Because they have Allah's blessings. Because why? They were close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And why? Because they have an attitude of rahmah towards people around them. And Allah says in the Quran to enforce this, Inna rahmatallahi qaribun minal muhsinin. Indeed, the rahmat of Allah is close to those who do good. So, Heraclius, upon hearing this, he says, he concurred, he acknowledged, yes, you are right. So in these upcoming weeks, all right, we're going to look closely at the technique and approach and the mannerism of the Prophet ﷺ when he performed da'wah. And this is very applicable to us because we interact with people every day. We communicate with people every day. How do we talk to people? And we're not talking about da'wah per se, because remember at the start of this lecture, I talked about the importance of akhlak, the importance of striving, and how this word itself, it is have a greater impact on changing people. Lisanul hal, all right? When your actions, afsahu min lisanil maqal, is more fluent, is more effective than what was just merely being said. It's more important for us to portray ourselves that, at the very least, people see Muslims as exemplary people, as people who carry themselves in a very dignified manner. So we're going to look at this, all right? And at the same time, we're going to look at the advice the Prophet ﷺ gave to his companions that were going to do their acts of da'wah in other parts of the Arabian Peninsula. So today, we understand therefore the premise that we're going to look at. And the premise that we should build ourselves from, that we should always be striving to do excellence. Do not be a person that is just that says things like, oh, we are Muslims, we are not so, we don't really care about this world. Because the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, all right, showed that they cared. They cared about being successful. They cared about putting their best effort in everything that they do. We are in a time whereby people just don't care, and the lesser you care, you think that's more religious. You think that's more Muslim to not care, to put in your best effort, to be refined in how we perform our various actions every day. To not care is more Muslim, according to some people today, and it's a very skewed understanding of how we look at ourselves. A Muslim cannot, they don't tolerate standards that are not optimum. All right, the Muslim doesn't like to be mediocre in his effort. He's always putting his best effort. And secondly, it's important for a Muslim, therefore, to base this on the right intentions, on sincerity, and also having a proper akhlak in conducting ourselves. So these are very complementary relationships that we're looking at. Inshallah, next we're going to look intimately at a lot of interesting stories next week. All right, and how the Prophet dealt with different kinds of people. All right, there will be those people who are of a high, of a dignified place in society. How the Prophet dealt with them. There will be the Bedouins. The Bedouins were people who came from the depths of the desert, and how the Prophet dealt with them. And you see a common line, how the Prophet SAW does dakwah to people around him. So we'll catch each other next week. Alhamdulillah, hari ini kita masuk kepada tahun ke-10 Hijrah. Maksudnya dalam pembelajaran kita tentang sirah Nabi SAW, dan kita melihat bahawasanya ramai gerombolan-gerombolan daripada orang-orang daripada sekeliling kota Madinah, jauh dan dekat, yang datang memasuki kota Madinah. Dan kita bertanya, kenapa mereka datang ke Madinah tiba-tiba? Pertama, sebab misi Rasulullah SAW dari segi peperangan, dari segi misi-misi untuk menghalang kemarahan musuh-musuh yang ingin menghalang agama Islam itu sudah hampir selesai. Dengan berakhirnya misi Tabuk, maka di sinilah orang-orang sudah mula merasakan bahawasanya keamanan sudah kembali termeterai di kota di Jazirah Arab, maka orang-orang datang kepada Nabi SAW. Tapi yang terlebih penting sekali, kenapa orang hendak memasuki kota Madinah adalah mereka ingin mengetahui lebih lanjut tentang agama Islam itu sendiri. Nak tahu tentang Islam. Dan kita tanya lagi, kenapa mereka nak tahu tentang Islam? Apa sangat tentang Islam mereka nak tahu? Mereka nak tahu sebab mereka lihat orang Islam ni secara ketenteraan mendapat kejayaan demi kejayaan. Dan mereka melihat bahawasanya, oh, mereka dapat kejayaan. Tapi orang Arab memang biasa berperang. Orang Aus dan Khazraj bertahun-tahun mereka berperang. Orang-orang di kota Mekah, itu mereka terkenal sebagai orang yang suka berperang. Mereka terkenal dengan semua perkara ini. Namun apakah yang membuat mereka ini, orang Islam berbeza? Kerana mereka melihat orang Islam ini bila berperang, hatta dalam berperang. Dan berperang ini satu perkara yang selalu melibatkan kemarahan, melibatkan sifat-sifat yang agresif pada diri manusia. Tapi ada sesuatu pasal orang Islam ni, bila mana mereka dalam peperangan sekalipun, mereka sangat terkawal, sangat berdisiplin dan tidak mengkompromikan akan akhlak mereka. Dan kita melihat, dan mereka melihat bila orang Islam masuk kota Mekah, 10,000 tentera, dan antara generalnya ialah Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid masuk ke kota Mekah, suasananya sangat damai, sangat aman. Dan mereka tiba-tiba membuat kesimpulan bahawasanya, kita lihat, kita ni dulu berperang, kita perang sama kita, tapi kesimpulannya sama. Aku perang sebab nak kuasa, kau perang pun sebab nak kuasa. Aku perang sebab aku ni gilakan takhta, dan kau pun sama juga. Dua orang yang berperang, tapi motivasi mereka sama, iaitu motivasi keduniaan semata-mata, motivasi nafsu semata-mata. Tapi yang membezakan orang Islam ialah Islam tu sendiri. Maka mereka tertarik, apa pasal Islam ni yang buat mereka sampai begitu berdisiplin. Itu satu. Dan kedua sekali, mereka lihat, oleh itu mereka melihat akhlak orang Islam. Mereka orang yang berjaya di medan perang, tapi yang lebih cantik ialah akhlak mereka dalam mendapat kejayaan tersebut. Nah, maka dua pelajaran pertama yang saya kongsikan tadi ialah pentingnya untuk kita jadi orang Islam ni untuk sentiasa melakar kejayaan untuk diri kita. Berusaha ke arah kejayaan. Kita sentiasa hidup satu suasana, kita merasakan kalau kita orang yang tak kisah, kita lebih beragama. Jadi kita selalu ada mindset, kalau orang tak kisah ni, kalau kita ni orang Islam patutnya tak kisah sangat benda-benda ni semua. Tak. Orang Islam adalah orang yang sentiasa meletakkan usaha, meletakkan sifat amanah pada usaha mereka. Bukanlah satu orang yang suka-suka buat, bila nak buat sambil lewa dalam usaha mereka. Itu satu. Kita dah belajar bertahun, dua tahun lama tentang sejarah Nabi. Dan antara sifat Nabi lah sangat mengambil berat secara detail tentang segala strategi, tentang segala pendekatan. Yang mana kita ni kata, ini semua sifat-sifat dunia belaka, nak berat-berat sangat buat apa? Tak, Nabi mengambil berat. Hatta saya pernah ceritakan, Nabi nak bina masjid sekalipun, Nabi mengambil berat tentang lakarannya, tentang bagaimana ia dibina, dan apakah tebal tipis tembok pun diambil berat oleh Nabi SAW. Itu satu. Kedua, akhlak. Yang menjadi akar, yang menjadi dasar bagi orang Islam itu adalah akhlaknya. Ya, kita nak berjaya. Tapi masalahnya bila kita berjaya tanpa didasari oleh akhlak Islamiah, tanpa sifat yang baik, maka itu datangnya nanti sombong. Maka dalam Quran ada orang namanya Fir'aun, ada kaum Ad, ada kaum Thamud. Semua kaum-kaum ni semua adalah kaum-kaum yang berjaya belaka dengan kemampuan mereka tersendiri. Tapi kenapa Allah mencela mereka dalam Al-Quran? Sebab mereka tidak mendasarkan kejayaan mereka itu kepada Tuhan yang Maha Agung, yang Maha Besar. Dan ini adalah akhlak, inilah adab Allah SWT. Kalau kita nak, walaupun kita berjaya, kita kena ingat yang ini semua datang dengan Allah SWT. Sebab Nabi masuk kota Mekah, berjaya, kejayaan besar, tapi Nabi menundukkan kepala baginda dengan penuh adab, dengan penuh merendah diri. Ini dua pengajaran penting. Usaha untuk berjaya dan kejayaan itu didasari oleh akhlak kita sebagai orang Islam. Itu pertama. Nah, ini membawa kita itu sebab orang Islam berjaya, seterusnya tersebar agama Islam ni melampaui kota Mekah Madinah sampai masuk ke tanah-tanah jajahan tentera Byzantium dan tentera Parsi. Dan tentera Rom, tentera Byzantium, tentera Parsi adalah kuasa-kuasa besar waktu itu. Dan mengapa mereka terhalau oleh orang Islam? Kenapa orang Islam berjaya ke atas mereka? Sebab orang Islam pada waktu itu mempunyai sifat apa? Mempunyai dua perkara ini. Kita orang-orang Islam mempunyai sifat yang mahu bersungguh-sungguh mencapai kejayaan dan mereka sungguh-sungguh berakhlak. Dan ini menarik perhatian sebab orang tentera Byzantium, kuasa Parsi, mereka ada kejayaan. Mereka ada segala macam kemewahan, tapi tak didasari oleh sifat takwa, tidak didasari oleh akhlak yang baik, yang mana menjadikan mereka kebencian pada masyarakat yang hidup di bawah mereka. Ini jelas terlihat pada keadaan satu ketika Heraklius, pemimpin Empire Byzantium. Dia memanggil general-generalnya, memanggil ketua-ketua kepimpinan tenteranya dan bertanya kepada mereka, kenapa kita ni susah sangat nak kalahkan orang Islam? Kenapa orang Islam ni hebat sangat? Mereka ni manusia ke bukan? Kata generalnya, memang manusia macam kita. Kita lagi banyak ke mereka lagi ramai? Tak, kita lagi ramai daripada mereka. Kita lagi hebat daripada mereka dari segi segala aspek ketenteraannya. Kenapa kita kalah? Maka salah seorang daripada ketuanya mengatakan, bezanya kita dengan mereka. Mereka ni orang-orang yang bangun malam dan berpuasa pada siang hari. Maknanya mereka ni ada ikatan kerohanian yang kuat dengan pencipta, dengan Allah SWT. Mereka adalah orang-orang yang menepati janji. Mereka adalah orang-orang yang sentiasa beramal makruf dan nahi mungkar. Mereka ni sangat menyuruh kepada kebaikan dan sangat membenci kepada kemungkaran dan menghalangnya daripada dimanifestasikan dalam masyarakat. Dan mereka adalah orang-orang yang sangat berkasih sayang sesama mereka. Sedangkan kita orang-orang Byzantium pula, kita ni adalah orang yang mabuk setiap hari. Kita berzina. Kita adalah orang-orang yang buat segala macam kerosakan di muka bumi. Segala kebaikan kami cegah, segala kemungkaran kami tegakkan. Nah, itulah sebab bezanya kami dengan mereka. Mereka ada bantuan, mereka ada sokongan daripada Tuhan. Sedangkan kita tidak. Inna rahmatullahi qaribun minal muhsinin. Rahmat Allah dekat pada orang yang membuat kebaikan. Dan Heraklius akur dengan keadaan tersebut. Maka pada minggu-minggu yang akan datang ini kita akan melihat bagaimana Nabi SAW menanggapi orang yang datang kepada baginda. Selama kita lihat Nabi SAW dalam aksi baginda, dalam keadaan baginda di medan perang, dalam baginda melakar situasi yang lebih besar. Sekarang secara kemanusiaan, kita lihat bagaimana Nabi SAW nanti akan berdakwah pada duta-duta yang datang kepada baginda. Nah, dan duta-duta ini bukan sebarang-sebarang bagai-bagai peringkat. Ada yang raja-raja, ada yang pemimpin besar, dan ada juga orang-orang Arab Badui, orang-orang yang datang daripada kawasan pedalaman. Dengan cara mereka yang kasar itu, bagaimana Nabi menanggapi mereka? Dan kita akan nampak satu rantaian yang cantik, bahawasanya mereka ini semua adalah orang-orang yang nanti kita nampak cara Nabi menanggapi mereka didasari oleh dua sifat kita katakan tadi. Sifat sentiasa bersungguh-sungguh mahukan kebaikan, dan sifat yang didasari akhlak yang mulia. Dan ini kita akan dapati pada minggu hadapan bila mana kita berjumpa nanti. Wassallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi washabihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.